Hey Vision Chasers, it's Dr. Bird here. Today in the United States, there are laws that compel companies to compensate workers if they are injured or if they even die while performing the duties associated with their job. Now, this was not always the case. Companies did not always have to do this. And so today we're going to talk about what happened to a group of women who were put at risk by simply doing their job. In the early 1900s, one of the popular items to have was a watch that could tell time and also glow in the dark at the same time. Now, these watches didn't require any charging from the sun because of the special paint that was used to paint the numbers on the face of the watch. And the women who worked in these factories painting these watches, they were paid a lot better than other women around the country. Now here's the catch, because watches, the faces of a watch is pretty small, and to really get those numbers in there, it's just really difficult. So in order to get this paint just right on these watches, it takes a really fine tip brush in order to make the numbers look legible and make it look really nice. So the women were instructed to put a point on the brush by putting the paintbrush in their mouth and just making that fine point, as you see here on your screen. Now, what made this paint glow was the fact that the paint contained radium. And the reason that is important is because radium, which has just been recently discovered, is radioactive, and that means it's very dangerous to the human body. And as these women were pointing their brushes, they were putting this very dangerous element into their body. Now, radium was first discovered in 1898 by a French husband and wife team. Their names were Pierre and Marie Curie. Now, Marie was a very incredible, sharp, and talented woman, and she would win the Nobel Prize for her work, along with her husband. Now, after the death of her husband, she goes on and wins a second Nobel Prize. And one of her daughters would win that same prize as well. So early on, radium was used as a treatment for cancer, but there were also some interesting uses as well, as you can see here. So they put it in toothpaste, skincare products, hair treatment, and also water. Now keep in mind, they did these things because there were a lot of things that they simply didn't know about radium and what it could do to the human body. Now the consumers were all just fascinated with radium's ability to glow. Now around 1916, we see the first company pop up that is painting these watches with this paint laced with radium to make these watches glow in the dark. And there's going to be two other companies that pop up around the United States as well. Now it's going to be primarily women who are working in the factories painting the watches. And as I said before, they were paid much better than other factory jobs, so they were happy to do the work. But it's important to mention that as the women were pointing these brushes with their lips, as they were handling this radium, the men, they wore lead aprons as they were handling the radium. So it appears that the men knew something that the women did not. So the women who worked in these factories, they were very happy. They were fascinated with this paint. There would be stories told of women when they would go home and take off their clothes would glow in the dark because it had the radium paint on them. The ladies would also paint their nails with this paint. And sadly, with all this contact with this radium, they were ingesting it in their body. Now, it would take time for the women to get sick, but when they got sick, it was very bad. Here's the story of one of the women who worked in this factory. Her name was Molly Magia. Her suffering started with what she thought was tooth decay. and the dentist would go in to remove the teeth that are bothering her, but what the dentist found out was that her jawbone would just dissolve to just a simple touch. just as hard as your jawbone is, imagine it just dissolving to the slightest touch, just dissolving. Imagine the holes in her mouth left by the pulled teeth. Imagine those holes never healing. Imagine blood and pus seeping from those holes in her mouth. Sadly, Molly died at the age of 24 in 1922. Now, as we get further into the 20s, more and more women become sick, and they start to come forward and ask these companies to compensate them for their pain and suffering as a result of working in these factories with this paint. But the company refused to accept responsibility because the symptoms were numerous, and the company claimed that it couldn't be attributed to working with the radium. Other women were just exhausted all the time. Other women sadly produced stillborn babies as a result of working with the radium. These women would be caused a lot of pain because of the radium that they were ingesting in their bodies. Now, 5 bold women, they decide to get together and sue this first company that opened in 1916. They wanted compensation for the damages related to working at this factory with the radium. And by the time these women decided to sue, there were over 50 women who had died terrible deaths from working with radium. And as they were suing this company, there were a number of obstacles that they had to deal with. They were very sick. It was believed at the time that these women only had weeks to live. And sadly, it was very difficult for them to find a lawyer to even take their case. But as you see here on your screen, they were able to reach a settlement with the company, and they received some compensation for their pain and suffering because of their work with this paint laced with radium. Now, the women who fought for this settlement, they were known as the Radium Girls, and this case would lead to future legislation to protect workers. Sadly, the women in this case, they were not able to live long to really enjoy this money. And a lot of the other women who didn't die, there would be birth defects that they would pass on to the future generations. There are people living now who have birth defects because of ancestors who worked with radium. Now, additionally, there was another lawsuit during the Great Depression, and the women who were involved in that, they were not very popular because they were suing a company during the Great Depression. So that's just a little bit about the Radium Girls. There are so many interesting details that go with that story, and so I encourage you to dig a little bit deeper, do your own research. You can even download the worksheet that goes along with this video, and there are also some more resources in the description section below, so I encourage you to check those out, dig deeper, find out the other information that relates to this sad, interesting, I guess is an appropriate word, it's an interesting story. So I encourage you to check that out. Also, if you would like to help us as we relaunch the Vision Chasers website, please look in the description section as well. There's something that you can do and that many of you have been doing to help us, and so I appreciate you. So that's our lesson for today, and until we meet again, please keep chasing the vision. Bye.